In this video, I'm going to show you the comparisons between the Canon 90D and the Canon 5D Mark IV. I'm going to show you the comparisons in the images. A lot of people are not that tech orientated who do photography. What's important to a lot of people is the quality of the images. So I'm going to show you the difference between the images of the Canon 90D and the Canon 5D Mark IV. Now the Canon 90D is considered a camera for enthusiastic photographers, people who are not professionals. And the price this camera at around £1,200. Now the Canon 5D Mark IV is considered to be a professional photographer's camera, and the price of this camera is around £2,500 approximately. It costs more than £1,000 extra to buy this camera than it does to buy this camera. So looking at both cameras, you can see the Canon 5D Mark IV is slightly bigger than the 90D, and it is a bit heavier as well. The grip is a little bit bigger. And then if we look at the back of the camera, let's move that strap out of the way. So you can see there's not a lot of difference in design between the two. The Canon 90D does have this flip out screen, which you can articulate in different directions, which is very handy. And so if you're taking a picture on a tripod low down, you can flip that up so you can see what you're taking the image of. And they don't have that on the Canon 5D Mark IV. So this video is not about comparing all the different technical functions of the cameras. In this video, I'm just going to compare the different image quality that I found. So I took both cameras out to test the picture quality. So here is the Canon 5D Mark IV, and also I took my Canon 90D. So in this image of St Mary's Lighthouse, it was taken on a very dull day, and this is using the 70mm lens, and well, it's a 24 to 70mm lens, but I've got it set at the longest I could do with 70mm. And this is on the 90D. Now I set the aperture for f18, 125/125th of a second, and ISO at 200. So if we just zoom in a little bit to have a look at the quality of the images, so you can see there's quite, even though the ISO was 200, which isn't that high, if we zoom in, you can see there's quite a bit of noise in the image there in the sky. You can notice it, and you can notice it on the buildings as well there. And it was quite a fair distance away from it, but because it's a cropped sensor on the 90D, it's not a full sensor, it zooms in more on the image. So the advantage of that is you can get closer to your subjects using the same lens as you would on the Canon 5D Mark IV. So let's just have a look then in comparison to the Canon 5D Mark IV. So this is exactly the same position. It was a tripod, and I had the same lens, and I still had it at 70mm, still f18, still 125th of a second, and still ISO 200. And you can see the difference in the crop of the image. So you get a lot more view around your subject, but I can't zoom in on it. And that could be advantageous in that if you're wanting to take wide angled images, you're able to do that with 70mm lens because it's got a full frame. You'll get more in your image. But there's a disadvantage in that if you wanted to zoom in further with your 70mm lens, you couldn't. That's the furthest it would go from that particular point. But if you've got the Canon 90D, you can get a much closer image, and also it is a bit sharper because you are closer to the image than what you are with the other lens. So if we just look at the detail, for example, if we look at the detail on here, just drag that down a bit, and we'll just have a look at, say, that arrow, although because it's so far away it's not crystal sharp. But if we compare that to the 5D and go in here, I'm not sure which is, there's hardly any difference, to be fair. If we have a look at this here, we can see some birds on the top which are a bit blurry, just look like blurred smudges. And then if we go to the 90D, the birds have a little bit more definition. So it is a little bit sharper on the Canon 90D, even though it's £1,000 cheaper, and you are able to zoom in further with this particular lens. If you just wanted a wide angle view with this particular lens, you can still get that, and you can get an even wider view if you go down to the 24mm. But sometimes you might want to have a close-up view of something, and then, unless you've got a larger telescopic lens, you wouldn't be able to do that with this particular lens. So you still have to, if you wanted to get close into that lighthouse, you would need to have an extra lens, say a lens that went up to, say, 300mm or 200mm. So you could do that. The disadvantage of changing from the 90D to the 5D is that your EFS lenses won't work, unfortunately. You cannot use an EFS lens on the Canon 5D Mark IV. And I used to have, well, I still have my Sigma 18 to 50mm lens, which I love. Cannot use it on the Canon 5D Mark IV. So you will probably, if you've got EFS lenses and you upgrade to the 5D Mark IV, although I'm not entirely sure you are upgrading in some respects, although you are paying more money. I mean, if we look at the quality of the images again, so if we look at this lighthouse here and we look at this lighthouse here, so this was taken with the £2,500 camera, and this was taken with the £1,200 camera, and this one we can see more image, more definition in those birds, although there is a little bit more noise in the image itself. If we have a look at the Mark IV and have a look at the noise, you can see there's less noise. But you can't take noise out of your images anywhere in Photoshop. But the advantage is, I think, if you're in low light, you're not going to get as much noise. So you're not going to have to use a lot of noise reduction in Photoshop, although you will need to use some. So with this image, this is taken from a different position, obviously, and we have got the sun shining on the lighthouse at this particular point in time, and it was a very short point when the sun actually shone. So this was taken with the lens set as 25mm f/16, ISO 100, and if we compare this image to the next image, you can see with the same, well, this is 24mm, it's slightly different, but and we have got a different shutter speed there. But which image do you prefer? So that's with the same sized lens. So you've got, like I say, you've got more view on both sides, but all you need to do with the Canon 90D is have another lens that has a wider angle. For example, you could get, like, I've got an 11 to 16 millimeter. So for example, you could get another wide angle lens that you could use if you want wide angled images like that. So if we zoom in then on the image itself, you can see there's a lot of noise in the sky there. Even though it's 100 ISO, and I think it's because it was so dark with it being so cloudy. And if we zoom in on the Canon Mark IV, you can see the noise isn't as great, although there is some noise there. Let's just have another look at the noise. You can see that quite dark patches here. And on the other one, there is some noise, but it's not as dark. But the sharpness, if we zoom right in here, I mean, because it's so far away, it's not going to be sharp. Have a look at the rocks here, the people there, and that sign. And then have a look at the 90D. Because it's cropping it a bit closer, it's a bit of an unfair comparison really, because it's cropped a bit closer. So you can see that label is a bit clearer than it was on the other image, although it is the same lens, and it is the same lens and the same setting on the lens practically, because you are still further away. It seems like you're further away, although you're not. That image isn't as clear, as sharp there. So, comparing them, I mean, is it worth an extra £1,000 to get rid of some of that noise when you can get rid of noise in Photoshop? And do you want all that extra space in your image? It depends on what kind of photographs you do. So this is with the 70mm setting on the lens, and this is the closest I could get from the position I was in. And if we just have a look at the sharpness, it is a lot sharper than the 25mm. You can actually, even the birds though don't have a great deal of definition. And then if we have a look at the Canon 90D, so you can see you get a lot more closer with the same lens. And then if we have a look, you can see the birds do have more definition there, but you can see again there's more noise in the image. So that noise, it was raining, there was a few patches on the camera lens, you can see there, the raindrops. You can't easily remove that noise in Photoshop. I'm going to show you how to do that. So I've uploaded this image into Photoshop. This is the raw file, and if we just have a look here, and you can change, like, you can do your settings here, change the contrast, highlights, etc. Add texture, clarity, dehaze it a bit, vibrance, and then you could change the highlights, light it up. What I'm trying to do is just try and make the image look more clarity in the image at the minute. So you can add sharpening here. When you add sharpening, you can see there's the noise. When you add the sharpening, you can see it increases the noise. You can have color noise reduction, and you can also have noise reduction. So I'm going to add sharpening, say 32%, and I'm just going to do this with the noise reduction, and you can see most of the noise has disappeared. Sometimes it does take away clarity from the image as well. So if we just turn that off, if we turn it off, you can see what it was like before we did the noise reduction, and then we turn it back on. So you can see the actual lighthouse hasn't changed that much in its sharpening, but you can see the noise is gone. And what I usually do as well is I usually go on here, remove to do with the lens, and then I usually just open it. So there we have our new image with hardly any noise. So if you've got Photoshop, or if you haven't, or if you use Lightroom, you can get rid of the noise in Lightroom. So to have to pay an extra £1,000 so your images don't have as much noise, I'm not sure whether that's entirely worth it. Although there are some other functions on the camera that you might be interested in. If it's just picture quality you're interested in, that might not be a big selling point. So in this image we've got a picture of a vase with some flowers in it, and this is taken with the 90D. I used quite a narrow aperture because I wanted the background to be dark, and so let me just zoom. I used the same lens. This is just the 50mm lens, one of the cheapest lenses you can get for Canon cameras. And if we just have a zoom in of the flower there, so this is the head of the flower here. You can see when we zoom in it's really blurry, you can't really make much detail from it. And then if we have a look at the 5D Mark IV, now it is a slightly different angle because of the crop factor. I had to move the tripod away so I could get the image and the frame around the same size. So when I was using the 5D, I had to move the tripod closer to the image. So the angle is slightly different, and also the Canon 5D Mark IV is a little bit larger, so a little bit higher on the tripod. So I couldn't account for all the variables, but so if we just zoom in here, you can see there's a lot more definition in that flower head. Well, I'm probably wrong saying a lot more. I would say some more. Because if we have a look at the flowers with the 90D, we zoom in a bit further, there's not that much definition. Now I did have the focus point on that flower head when I took the image on both images, although the camera, that flower seems to be a slightly different angle to this one. But overall, if you look at the image quality overall, there's not a lot of difference in that image quality. You've also got to take into account that with the 90D, I had to move the tripod at least a metre away from the subject. And with the 5D Mark IV, the tripod was very close to the subject. So that might also account for the difference in quality. And people who are using the Canon 5D Mark IV, I think they probably sell more images because people respect the fact they've got this professional camera, that they've spent an extra £1,000 on it, so it's bound to be a better camera and you're bound to take better photographs with it. But I think that's just a myth. And you know, with the Canon 90D, it's still an excellent camera, and it's a newer camera than the Canon 5D Mark IV. There are some other advantages to do with the technical abilities of the, like it has a faster shutter frame, for example. It has 11 frames per second on the 90D, whereas the Canon 5D Mark IV only has 7 frames per second. So there is differences like that. But the image quality, there's not a lot of difference, although there is in this image some difference in the definition of that flower head. If we have a look at this flower head as well up here, we can see some definition there. And if we have a look at the 90D on this one, that is also not as defined as the other camera. But you have to remember that the camera was about a metre away with the 90D than with the 5D Mark IV. So here's a close-up of the image. This is taken with a 105mm macro lens, and you can see you get a lot more definition of the flower head there. And if we look at the 5D Mark IV, there's not a lot of difference, and this was using the 105mm lens for both of them, although because of the crop factor, obviously I'm zoomed in further with this image than I am with this image, but you can see there's not a lot of difference in the quality of the image. I used to worry about my photography before, because I used to think I haven't got the same professional camera as the professionals have got. I couldn't afford to buy a £2,000 500 camera or a £2,800 camera as they were then, and I was thinking to myself, I'll never be able to produce as good images as those photographers who have got these huge expensive professional cameras and lenses. And even like put me off entering competitions, because I was thinking, if I enter a competition, someone else will enter who's got these expensive cameras and they'll top mine. I do think there is some kind of prejudice in the community, like the photography community, against photographers who haven't got a professional camera, and I think you are more likely to get more sales if you do take photographs with the Canon 5D Mark IV than if you've got a 90D. I think people probably respect you more if you've got the Canon Mark IV than if you've got the Canon 90D, because they'll view you as a professional photographer because you have this expensive camera. So there is like a stigma attached to using cheaper cameras, although like I've just tested and I have tested the camera in other situations as well, and there's hardly any difference in the quality of the images. Like I was saying, all you need is a different lens. So if you've got a Canon 5D Mark IV, you would need a telephoto lens, so you could zoom in more on the subject, because with the 24-70 you couldn't get that close to the subject, but you do get a wider view with it, so you're less likely to need a wide angled lens, but you would need a telephoto lens. Whereas you've got the Canon 90D, you can zoom into the subject quite well, so you're less likely to need a telephoto lens if you've got the 24-70mm lens, but you would probably need a wide angled lens as well. So the Canon 90D, if you were traveling, you would need a wide angled lens and probably the 24-70, whereas if you've got the Canon 5D Mark IV, if you were traveling, you would need the 24-70, and you would also need a telephoto lens as well. So the noise factor can be a selling point if you're taking photos in low light. For example, if you were a wedding photographer, there is a lot of times where you have to take images in low light, like inside the churches and civic centres and things. There's usually quite a lot of low light, and sometimes inside the reception areas there's low light, and if it's a dull day, obviously there's low light. So like if you're a wedding photographer, it would be a selling point to have like the 5D Mark IV. If you would take another photograph, so if you were doing a food photography, for example, product photography, if you were doing landscape photography, you know, you could use a Canon 90D and get the same image quality. But like I say, you would have to choose different lenses for whether you want to be close in on the subject or whether you wanted to have a wide angle view. So it's up to you whether you spend the extra £1,000 buying the Canon 5D Mark IV. I bought mine second hand. I didn't pay the full price for it because it was too expensive. But now that I've got it, I'm thinking, what do I use? Do I use my 90D or do I use the Canon Mark IV? Do I keep the Canon Mark IV, Canon 5D Mark IV, or do I keep both of them? Do I sell one of them? Which one would I sell? So I'm now in a quandary with what to do with the other camera that I've got. Because there's not a lot of difference. I was imagining the image quality to be so different. I was going to be blown away by the Canon 5D Mark IV, considering it was double the price. And I'm not blown away. And the image quality there's hardly any difference. So I'll let you make your mind up. Thank you for watching this video. If the image quality doesn't look very good on the video, that you can blame YouTube for that. On my HD video, it looked very crystal clear. So on the YouTube, it doesn't look crystal clear when you're zooming in on the images and things like that. So there's something wrong with the YouTube processing, I think. But thank you for watching. Until the next video, bye for now.